It's alternatively titled as 1 bit per person per second. Okay, and I will spend some time in arguing for what we are targeting, and then we'll also talk about how to achieve that, right? So if you look at human endeavors, right? We have built the pyramids, we have built the Suez Canal, we have invented. It's actually very loud for me, which is why I'm. Oh, you people are not able to hear it. I think it's. Can you just turn off these speakers, please? Yeah, just turn off the monitors. All right. Hello. Fine. Okay. Much better. So yeah. So we've built a lot of things, right? As human beings, we have built really incredible pieces of machinery, of organizations, etc. However, if you think about what is the biggest thing that we have built, the biggest thing that we have ever built, it's very hard to fathom what that is, right? I mean, we'll say that we've built, atomic bombs, or we've built, we've gone to the moon, right? We've gone to the moon, etc., etc. Most of them are usually, American inventions. But if you look at the telecom network itself, it's really the most incredible thing that the human beings have pulled off. If you just take the optical fiber alone, leave alone the copper wires, the optical fiber, we have 1 trillion miles of optical fiber. 1 trillion miles of optical fiber, okay? Which means that we can effectively, next slide please, span the solar system with the optical fiber we've built from one end to the other. It's that big. Okay, it's the biggest machine ever constructed. Usually what happens is when you go from a billion to trillion, you think that it's just 3 more zeros, at the end of 6 zeros. But it's actually at the end of 9 zeros. But it's really, really huge. Now, it also costs 2 trillion rupees, sorry, $2 trillion to build this network. It has cost us $2 trillion. And the funny example is if you paid an auto $2 trillion, next slide please, it will take you all the way to Alpha Centauri. Okay, that's how far it will go. That's how far that $2 trillion will go. But the problem with this amazing achievement of capitalism and human endeavor and science and technology in 20th century is that it's extremely sparsely spread out. Not everybody has access to this. Okay, next slide, please. And it's a mess. Okay, it's a huge mess. It's not conceived as an incredibly symmetric, smooth architecture. It's not built as a cathedral, it's built as a bazaar. Somebody sets up some shop, somebody puts up a router, somebody runs a piece of wire from one place to another, somebody lays an underground cable, somebody uses a wireless. So they're all different types of, it's a spaghetti of every kind of technology. Some of them are centuries old, okay? The telephone system is almost 150 years old. And even today, you take a 150-year-old telephone from Stockholm Telecom Museum, plug it into your home phone line, and it will still work. It will still give you a dial tone. So that's the beauty of this telecom system, and also the challenge. The big challenge is that it does not serve the poor. It does not serve 90% of human population. Next slide, please. So if you look at this, all right, there are just about, government says, there are 400 million, but about 200 million people who have internet access at all on any device. In households, very few households, if you just look at this, right, you will see that the unevenness of teledensity, as it's called, is very, very varied. And there are just about 18% houses in Chandigarh which have a computer or laptop. If you look at our own Telangana, it's 0.07%. The figures are extremely stark. The figures are extremely stark, and we are not talking about Netflix or YouTube. We are talking about GPay. We are talking about Aadhaar card. We are talking about banking systems. So there's uneven teledensity, and by the way, at all levels. For example, if you say that there is connectivity in a village, what you're saying is that one landlord of the village has a smartphone. That's it. And then you say that the village has got internet, access. So it's very uneven, even at the most micro levels. Just the man of the house has a phone. The rest of the 5-6 people don't have it. And the problem with this is that unless it's profitable, people will not do this. It's essential for our existence now, just as air and water is, not even food, as air and water is. Because without that, you are nobody. You are not counted, you are not protected, you are not served. So you've made profitability the sole criterion for accessibility, which is really weird. And it's not just about India. Next slide, please. It's even about US. This is the US map. Now, this is the broadband penetration of US. If you see the clusters, they are around New York, Boston area, something around Chicago, the California, Silicon Valley, and the Seattle belt. But if you see rest of it, it's extremely stark. US has a drought of data. Okay, they are all starving of data. Next slide, please. Now, apart from that, there are government policies which shut you down all the time. Now, this is today's picture. Right now, there are 7 shutdowns going on across the world where people are being denied data. India is a leader, by the way, in this. Okay? India has had one shutdown or the other for the last 5 years. There has been no let in the amount of shutdowns that India has seen, next to Mozambique for some reason. And in the last 12 months, 134 shutdowns. So there is a map of this on the net. You can search for it on the Internet Society's. There's a special section on the shutdowns. So this is the environment in which we are trying to give very basic digital access to everybody, right? Everybody. And that's what my presentation and my technology is all about. Next slide, please. So how do we ask ourselves of giving access to people who are data poor, who have a drought of data all around them, who are unable to survive even up to the standards of 20th century, leave alone the 21st century. And for that, we have to undo what we imagine data is. We have to undo what we think internet is, what we think telephony is, what communications is all about. So if you actually look and ask yourself, what is the practical minimum amount of data that you require to lead a simple, safe life? That is the question. So what's the practical minimum? Next slide, please. What's the minimum capacity to sustain? What's the technology? What infrastructure is required, let's say, to sustain a body of 1,000 people living in a village, a neighborhood, or whatever? They could actually be on a ship for all we care. So, and this is actually very rich. Now, if you look at what comes on WhatsApp, and you distill it out and you say, I just want to look at the most useful messages. For me today, 2 messages were useful. One, to know what time this is starting, and another was a friend's daughter's wedding list and when it's going to happen. The rest I could have done without, really speaking. Okay? Financial transactions. If you're poor, you'd probably pay 1 person a day, probably 5 people. All right? 3 emails of 1 kilobytes each, another 5 with text attachments, and 5 calls. Now, if you add all this up, which is the basic requirement of your data, what is it? Next slide, please. It turns out to be 10,000 bytes in 24 hours. 10,000 bytes is what you require. But everybody needs it. That's the whole point. You cannot say that, one person will get 100 Mbps connection and rest of them can, die without it. So that is less than 1 bit per second. We are not talking about 1,000 bits. We are not talking about millions of bits or gigabits. We are talking of providing everybody in the world with 1 bit per second. So that's what my speech is called. 1 bit per person per second. That's all we demand of the technology and of the regulations and of the governments and of the private sector. Next slide, please. So the solution that we are proposing here is actually a whole lot of people who have contributed to it. So I'll just briefly run through them. Digital Empowerment Foundation, I will not mention because you already know all about it. We'll pass on with that. ARDC is a grant-making body based out of San Diego that I'm associated with, which makes grants for technological progress of open technologies, which will allow people access to digital communications. HF Signals is a business that I run, where we develop open source wireless technologies. Hamnet EU, I'll just talk about what they do in a bit, and I'll show you what they do. And there's, of course, the Lamakaan Amateur Radio Club that I'm glad to have been part of since its foundation. And a lot of those members are here who have contributed significantly to the technology that we are going to talk about. Okay? And there's Osmocom. Again, I'll hold back on what Osmocom has done. Next slide, please. So this is what Hamnet has done. This is Germany. Okay? Yet, all these lines that you see from one city to another have been connected not through any telecom network, but through a series of 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi based wireless links which work from one city to another. Okay, that's the beauty of this. 50 megabits per second lines connecting actually whole of Europe, but it was getting too dense. These markers were getting too dense, which is why I have sort of zoomed into just Germany to show you that. But all across from Spain down here up to Denmark, you could send a whole packet of data without ever crossing over any commercial or for-profit network. It's all run by volunteers using the technology which was developed by Hamnet and was sponsored by ARDC. So that, and each of these points that you see does not cost more than $200, $300 to put up. So you see that they've lit up the entire continent with less than about $500,000, which is really peanuts if you look at this, right? And it's all done on Wi-Fi, so you do not pay spectrum charges. The technology is available, little tweaked. It's not your regular wireless that you use at your office, but it's all the same. Okay, next bit of technology, please. This is a radio which I have developed. Most of the software is written by me, but actually significant contributions by a lot of people. Now, as you can see, it's very small, right? The size is very small. What this radio does is that it trades speed for distances in a very exaggerated way. So it works at a speed of about 4 bits per second, that's all, just 4 bits per second. However, it will span continents. It does not require any other infrastructure at all. This radio is all you need, and a piece of wire, about 30 or 40 feet of wire thrown over a tree or something, and these are actually on display here. You can actually see them today and tomorrow. This radio costs about $500 to make. But with this $500, without requiring any infrastructure, you can be communicating, sending text messages across. So if you have this radio, for example, in a small community, it works. And it works without any infrastructure because it bounces the radio waves off the ionosphere and back again. The third component of the solution is, next slide, please. The GSM network, right? We all love phones and we need phones. But it costs about $100 million to build a whole network. And this is actually a simplified framework of what it takes to make a call go from one handset to another, right? So what you see here on this side are the towers. They are called BTS, which says, what's it, base transceivers? Yeah, it's too much of a soup, right? Then it talks to the base station controller, which talks to the main switch, And the main switch has got something called VLR, which is visitors location register, and host location register, and there is actually a lot of, about more than 50% of the technology is not about connecting people, but about charging people. Okay? The authentication, authorization, and accounting, the triple A's of telecom, okay, is about 60% of the cost of the telecom, right? You don't want calls to go through unless there is balance in your phone. And that's actually what takes most of the money to build. As a result, they charge you money for that. So it's an extremely complicated technology, which takes about probably about 100 man-years to build. Okay, I have one man sitting here. I don't know how many years he spent doing this. Nursing is here. But it's a very complex piece of technology, and it involved a lot of specialized hardware. But in the last 15 years, okay, some of the grantees of ARDC have been working at making most of it work as an open source software. Okay, and in the last 1 year, the state of art of this free software movement has come to the point that it could be substantially reduced, next slide please, into something which looks like this, which is here. This is an entire GSM base station and a whole GSM network right here. So on your phones, if you can look for you can select the mobile operator, right, called Airtel. You can try for something called ComSec, or 72424 as a network. And if you choose that, you will get on to this network, and you'll be able to make calls through this network. Okay, right now we have limited its power to within this room and a little more, but this can go to about 5 to 10 kilometers. So actually, if you can deploy this in a community, it actually goes a fairly long distance. So this is another important piece of what we are showing here today. Next slide, please. Now these are actually your Tata Sky dishes, right? I mean, you've seen these Tata Sky dishes. Some of them are big, some of them are small, but there are a group of volunteers and a group of radio amateurs who got together to make a geostationary satellite, which, unlike Elon Musk's Starlink, does not cost you any money, nor do you have to have a user ID password to get through it. It's an open access point in space. It's an open access point in space through which you can connect, and you can essentially have intercontinental communications of voice, data, even video, without paying anybody, without even asking anybody's permission. Right? So this is the final piece of technology, and the ground stations for this, extremely low-cost ground stations, were developed in Hyderabad by our Lamakaan Amateur Radio Club. The developers are here. I'll shortly call them on stage. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. It's all packaged into one small console, which can be inserted inside a van, and the van is here. And today and tomorrow, I would invite you people to come and take a look at this incredible piece of technology. Incredible in the sense of reducing the footprint, of reducing the cost, and the ease of deployment. This can be deployed in about 15 minutes or half an hour once you roll it into a village, into a disaster area, into any area which is completely disconnected from the rest of the net. So, and this entire thing is packaged into this van, which is standing outside. Next slide, please. And you can see the van here. Okay. And the people who have worked behind this are right here, and I would like to call them. Prashant, can you please come up? Prashant has actually built the GSM base station. In the last 2 weeks, he's worked really hard, I can't tell you how hard. So that's Prashant is here. Amar is here. Amarendra Prasad, please come up, man. Amarendra Prasad has been responsible for doing the geostationary satellites, ground stations, along with Sashi. Sashi is here. Sashi, come. So Sashi and these two guys have, built the GSM base station. I've done the the long distance HF radio. So this is our small team here who've sort of pulled it off, and we actually worked pretty hard for the last 2 weeks to get this demo going. So if not today, tomorrow, there's actually a problem of line of sight to the satellite that we're trying to access from here. So we are not unable to demonstrate the satellite link, but the rest of the stuff is all here, including the GSM base station. This is actually very interesting, so please, drop by and take a look at it, and we'll be glad to explain more to you. All right, thank you very much.